But first, let me start off by thanking you. Thank each and every one of you for joining me today for this impactful Leadership Global event, Critical Benchmarks, What Teams Need to Thrive, with the one and only Karen Mangia. I got to tell you, I have been a fan of Karen's for years, and she has done several events for us. She's been on our podcast. She is a powerhouse. She is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author. She is an executive with Salesforce. She's a future of work strategist, a keynote speaker, a TEDx speaker, and an executive coach. She's phenomenal, one of my favorite speakers. For those of you I have not met, I'm Linda Fisk. I'm the CEO of Leadership Global. Leadership Global is a confidential, supportive, and private community for influential women all around the world. In Leadership Global, we create and support both personal and professional breakthroughs, and we guide women to greater and greater levels of leverage and freedom. As a member of Leadership Global, you have the opportunity to be inspired and motivated by other women in leadership who will cheer you on, counsel you, support you to greater and greater levels of success and impact. So if you're not yet a member of Leadership Global and you want to learn more, please feel free to reach out. Now, let's talk about what we're going to dive into for the next hour. I got to tell you, all of us know how important benchmarking is. And knowledge of best practices in benchmark is absolutely key. It can be used by very skilled leaders as a way to kind of wake up a complacent organization. But even in those cases, using information mindlessly to try to replicate what once worked well for someone else somewhere else is rarely a successful formula. In a fast-moving world, you actually need new ways of operating that are based on developing better practices and sometimes even big jumps all the time as quickly as possible. And since the odds are that the vast majority, if not all of your competitors, are following that kind of approach, there's a great opportunity here. Now, this is what Karen is going to lead us through. What are the routines, the rituals, the boundaries that winning teams and organizations actually implement to thrive? You are going to join me to discover what the benchmarks are from how to win in the new world of work from Wall Street Journal best-selling author and future of work expert, Karen Mangia. Now, before we dive in, let me tell you just a moment about Karen. As I've already mentioned, she's one of my favorite speakers, one of my favorite thought leaders, someone that I have come to deeply respect and admire. She helps customers around the world solve complex strategic business problems and to position themselves for future growth. Karen has a very deep understanding of the customer experience inside and out, from leading global voice of the customer portfolios for Fortune 50 companies, and from 20 years of consulting directly with customers across multiple industries and a ton of different segments. In her role as Vice President of Customer and Market Insights at Salesforce, Karen engages with key customer accounts, and she collaborates with them to develop really innovative strategies to address some of their key business challenges. So she helps actually translate feedback into action to increase customer retention, customer growth, customer satisfaction. She's published 3 books, everything from Listen Up, How to Tune into Customers and Turn Down the Noise, to her most recent, which is Success with Less, Releasing Obligations and Discovering More Joy. And she delivered her first TEDx talk in 2019, and I'm ready for the next one. I got to tell you, Karen, you are honestly just one of the most powerful leaders that I have come to know over the past 3 years. And I'm so grateful that you're sharing your wisdom and your insight with the women that I have the privilege of being in community with every single day, the leaders of Leadership Global. Thank you, Karen.
What a pleasure to be among a group of leading ladies. And we're exploring the topic of our time. What is work now? What does it mean? What's our relationship with work in our lives? How is it changing? And what does this new world of employee empowerment and engagement look like? As I was thinking about our time together today, what showed up for me is, have you ever noticed how often we equate success with more. Whether that's more products, more profits, more activities, or more accomplishments, we buy into the belief that we have to do more, to have more, to be more. And that will sum up to success. And then in phase one of reworking work, along came something called the Great Resignation. You remember this, right? And the message behind the Great Resignation was, for the first time in working history, the more that was being offered, even if that was more pay, more PTO, or more perks, was not summing up to success for employees. And that got me thinking, and it probably got you thinking too, as leaders, if it's not more of the things that have historically worked, just like Linda was saying in the opening, if that playbook that we've always used to attract and retain top talent is no longer effective, if it's not more pay, more PTO, and more perks, maybe it's time for us to start asking a different question. Because here is the question that our employees are asking themselves and seeking every single day: more of what matters. Pause and think about that just for a moment for yourself. When you consider what matters to you as a leader in your organization right now, what is it? And how different do you see what matters now than you did in 2019 or 2020? Or 2021, or even 2022, or now amidst this great set of layoffs. So the key, and some of what we're going to talk about today, is getting inside the mindset and the understanding of what matters and how do we have those conversations. And something that fascinates me as we look about what has been changing in this world of work and employee experience and employee engagement is we started with phase one, that great resignation, great reshuffle, great reconsideration, whatever phrase stood out to you, when employees looked around and asked the question, what matters? And the answer was something than what it has been in the past. The answer was more frequently flexibility, autonomy, and choice. The opportunity to have a greater influence over how, when, and where work was showing up in their lives. And so what we saw at that point in time is, first of all, people exiting traditional structures that they've been a part of for a long time to do one of three things: start their own business, change to an entirely different industry, right? We see teachers, leaving to go into different professions. We see attorneys and healthcare workers leaving and changing professions entirely, becoming teachers, knowledge workers. We saw people say, the industry that I'm in doesn't seem to be conducive any longer to the kind of work and life that I want. And then we also saw people really making a great acceleration, right? Going for that dream job that they've always wanted with gusto. And then along with that has come the fractionalization of work. So the fractionalization of work is this concept that no longer will you draw your paycheck from just one entity. You're assembling a series of ways that you create a revenue stream for yourself. Now, you might have a job at a traditional company, and you might be running a robust side hustle, or you might become a contractor and piece together multiple clients or become a consultant. But this idea of no longer being single-threaded through a single organization to draw on your paycheck. Well, we went through that period of time. And if you think back to when that great resignation was happening, for the first time in history, there were 6 job openings for every 1 eligible worker. Pause to process that for a moment. 6 job openings for every 1 eligible worker last summer. What does that mean? Well, talent can be choosy, right? The power to negotiate rests in the hands of the employees. And so as employers and leaders, we tended to get more deeply curious about the answer to that, what matters. And I saw lots of organizations running boomerang campaigns. Yours might have been one of them, right? How do we go find people who used to work here and get them to come back? How do we figure out what this new world of a great workplace experience looks like when we might be distributed or virtual, or maybe the bike share program that was free is no longer doing it for you as a benefit? So the organizations that I saw really winning and some of the benchmarks of success in that first phase of reevaluating work and changing how it shows up in our lives focused on getting deeply curious about one core element that's critically important to all of us as we think about how we feel about the work that we do and how we feel about the context in which that happens. It's one word that matters more than any other when we're considering what matters. And it's as relevant now as it was in phase one of this great reshuffling and this changing world of work. Take a guess what it is. Put some guesses in the chat for me. What is that one word that matters most? Meaning. That's a great one, Robin. Freedom. That's a great one as well. Satisfaction. Kim, yes. When we look at this, it's actually one word. Oh, there it is. Value to the world. Okay, you don't have your first name written out there, so I'll call you Enmay. Purpose. Thank you, Mel. Yes, it's all a function of the word values. Now, if you think about this, right, most companies have some kind of a, core values statement that they put out. Now, here's the question. When was the last time the organization you lead or are a part of pressed pause to revisit those values? And to take that a step further, when was the last time you as a leader assessed the alignment or gaps between the values of the organization and the values of the people within the organization? And let me share a useful experiment that is a benchmark that I've seen pay significant dividends, and that I've done in a number of workshops with leaders just like you to excellent results. And it's this. It was created at Stanford, and it's called the stress-free experiment. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Wouldn't you like to live stress-free? I mean, raise your hand. Sounds awesome, right? Well, here's how this worked. The brilliant researchers at Stanford University started their scientific experiment as an intervention with a group of university students who were reporting a high degree of burnout due to the number of tasks that they had on their plate, including looking for jobs, as well as feeling a high degree of uncertainty about the future. Does any of this sound familiar? Well, here's what they did. They took this group of university students and they said, hey, you have a break coming up. And over the break, here's your assignment. Spend 10 minutes each day with a pen and paper. Now, there's brain science magic to why you need a physical pen and paper, and set a timer for 10 minutes. And they said, all we want you to do is write down anything that comes to your mind. But the most important things are physical pen, physical paper, 10 minutes. We're not going to grade you on grammar or spelling. You don't even have to read what you write, just turn it in. And then, like great scientists, they selected one group and they said, for you, we have a special assignment. For you, we want you to use your 10 minutes to write about your top value and how your top value shows up in your everyday life. They collected the journal pages from the students and they continued to study that same group of students for 3 years to quantify their performance of the group that wrote about their values versus the one that just journaled. Now, because the scientists at Stanford are very smart people, they have gone on to repeat this experiment hundreds of thousands of times with everyone from entrepreneurs to executives and everyone in between, and the results are consistently the same. Even if one time for 10 minutes, you write about your top value and how your top value shows up in your everyday life, you will demonstrate statistically higher and measurable versions of performance, health, resilience, ability to access new ideas, innovation. You'll report a higher sense of belonging. Even if you did it for one time, they can measure those values for up to 10 years. So consider this. Now, what would happen if you did the stress-free experiment yourself and then had the people you lead do the same and you matched up those values? And here's why I think this exercise matters so much and why the leaders I work with are winning with using just this simple activity. It's this. When we think about values, I define values as simply the expression of your top preference in any given moment. For example, that could be getting a promotion, maybe your top value at any given moment. It might be family time. It might be wellness. It might be discovery, learning, innovation, whatever that is. I think about burnout as living outside of your values for an extended period of time. And here's why having a conversation with your colleagues and the people you lead about values matters so much. If your top value is family time, and I schedule a meeting with you every single night during your family dinner, how long is it going to take before you burn out? Well, why is that? I'm forcing you as a function of your employment to live outside of your values for an extended period of time. So here's what happens. When you get clear about your values and then you ask the people around you to do the same and you match them up, what you will discover more often than not, and I've discovered this with thousands of executives, is you often have shared values. And the gap is that you execute them differently. So here's where we deploy the next tool to create a future of work that works for everyone. And it's this curiosity. Here's a great question. Once you get clear about your value, imagine I was going to share mine with Linda. And I said, Linda, my top value at the moment is empowering others to realize their full potential. And imagine Linda said to me too. That's my top value. And then she followed it up with the question, Karen, why does that value matter to you so much? So maybe I would tell Linda the story of my own major medical setback to comeback story, where work was so out of alignment in my life, it led to 8 years of major medical. Linda and I would probably learn something about each other. Linda would discover not only what I value, but why I value it. By the way, if you discover that your entire team has a set of values that don't look at all what's on that values statement in your company, maybe it's time to reconsider. Maybe it's time to revisit those values. So first step is getting clear on your values. Well, now we're moving into this period of time where, I think about stage 2 as we're working in this distributed period of work, right? Some people are trying these return to office mandates. Some people are working from anywhere. There's every configuration of how work may or may not work. And when we move on from values, the next thing that we've been solving for in phase 2 of this employee engagement experience and how work shows up, where there's some critically important benchmarks, is all about getting at this gap between what employers are willing to offer and what employees expect. This often comes down to the battleground you may have noticed of where work happens and when work happens, right? Where do we do the work and what hours are we expected to do this work? Now, if phase 1 is all about living in alignment with our values, phase 2 of this great work reshuffle is all about trust. At the core of where and when work happens is trust, right? Because as leaders, as employees, the core question and the reason we force people into a defined space of where work happens and when work happens is we're like, how do I know my employees are working? And what's happening on the other side of this equation is employees are saying, if I don't see my manager, how does my manager know how hard I'm working? The way we address that trust gap is critical to performance and potential. And so I'm going to share a few examples of some excellent benchmarks that are coming out in this space that are very insightful about where and when work happens. But essentially now we're trying to solve this trust gap. And here's where we face a challenge. All humans on planet Earth prefer meaning to mandates. Everybody back in the office right now. We're going to be here 5 days a week. What are your employees asking? Why is that? The company's never been more profitable. I've never gotten more work done. The results support that we can work this way. Why do I have to come back? Absent meaning, mandates damage trust, because the underlying message there, right, is I can't trust you. Now, I'll give you an example of an organization that's doing phenomenal work in this space of moving from mandates to meeting and still getting to the outcomes that matter to the employee, right? We still have to make money. We still have to support our customers, right? But how we get there is critically important. But first, let me share some research that's been recently released. And this is some work I had the opportunity to do with Cushman and Wakefield, which is a leading real estate services firm. They're focused on, purpose of space. And we've been studying some benchmarks and doing some pulse surveys about how this nature of work is changing and what it is that employees value in work. And something that was fascinating about the research they've done is that employees value flexible schedules even more than they value flexibility in where they work. So given the choice, now imagine offering a choice of which is more important to you to have flexibility, when you work or where you work. 94% of employees from our study, which is many, many thousands of people, 94% of employees want flexible hours. 79% of employees want location flexibility. Now, here's where this really comes home to roost when we start to look in the direction of talent. Employees who are unsatisfied with their level of flexibility are 2.6 more times as likely to look for a new job. Think about the cost of that potential churn. So let's get into the why behind that, right? Going back to the question that we had earlier, why does this matter to you so much? Why is it more the schedule versus when it happens? So when it comes down to the location flexibility, the citing factors, the reasons that they want flexibility in where they work, and these are in order of priority relative to what they reported in the study is most important. First is ability to focus, right? They said the reason I don't want to go into the office is because when I get there, it's noisy, I'm distracted, and I can't get anything done. So I end up working more. So that was the number one reason for requesting location flexibility about where work happens. Number two, collaboration. They actually found that because people in these, office configurations, you may not be in the office at the same time as your team, it wasn't helping collaboration. It was strangely diminishing it. Third factor, ability to learn. That office commute time they cited as taking up time that they could otherwise invest in learning and activities that supported their ability to do their job. And when coming into an office, that's the time that gets sacrificed. Now, they cited as positive reasons to come to the office, bonding with colleagues, and feeling energized. And here's why I think those insights are important. Because when we understand what drives why people want to come to an office versus not, we can work on creating upside. So with regard to scheduling flexibility, interestingly, the number one reason is the same, which is ability to focus. People said, look, I can understand throughout my day when my best focus times are. For somebody who's a morning person, that could be 4 to 6 in the morning. But if I have to be in the office, for fixed hours, and those aren't my most productive hours, well, I'm still not getting anything done. For somebody else, that might be at night. For somebody, they might break it into blocks. Next is, again, around collaboration. They found it was easier to collaborate. And here's what's critically important: to be heard when a larger percentage of the collaboration that happens can take place asynchronously. Why is that? We got very curious, and we even did some one-on-one interviews with people. And what showed up most frequently is answers ranging from, I'm an introvert, so I don't want to speak up always in the meeting or in the conversation. I don't feel comfortable, but in a collaborative document, I can do that. People who aren't great at being on the spot, right? We're doing the brainstorming or there's a question and you have to answer right now. Maybe you've been this person too. You leave the meeting and you think, oh, I wish I would have said fill in the blank. Asynchronous flexible work makes it easier for people to do their best work, share their best ideas when those come to be. Third was a perception of greater equity, meaning more voices get heard more frequently when we have a way that we can capture this that gives everybody the opportunity to be at their best. Well, as we look in the direction of, what it is that's possible, I think about 3 things that are very helpful. We were talking about flexibility, autonomy, and choice. And within that continuum of flexibility, autonomy, and choice, and considering how do we implement this and actually bring this to life, I want to share an example with you of a company who looked in this direction. How do we get out of mandates and step into meaning? How do we take into account what it is we're willing to offer relative to what our employees expect? How do we set people up to be at their best? Now, this company is General Mills. And you might recall General Mills as the company, right, that we were all killing ourselves to buy the flour and the cereal, right? We were all going to be on the Great British Baking Show during the pandemic, right? We're going to make this bread and all of those sorts of things. So imagine they survey their employees and, of course, discover that their employees have a very high degree of burnout, not surprisingly. So what do you think they did? What do you think they rolled out? Put it in the chat. How are they going to solve this? How are they going to solve it? What did General Mills roll out? Well, it's the most predictable solution, more PTO, right? You're burnt out, we'll give you some time off. So take a guess, a gluten-free. Patsy, I love it. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? What percentage of their workforce opted in to this free PTO and took advantage of it? What percentage? 10,000 workers, what percentage took that PTO? 0%. You're pretty close on that guess. 1%. Yes, 5%. You're smart people. 8%. 8%. And of course, what happened to burnout? Stayed the same, didn't it? And so the very smart folks at General Mills stepped away and decided to do two very smart things. First, get more curious. So they launched a series of one-on-one interviews with employees, and they asked, what would be helpful to you in combating burnout? What might we be missing? Which is a very powerful question I see organizations asking that are changing the game. What might we be missing? Thousands of interviews. Then they got curious and engaged an organization that works with brain science. So what is it that lights up in our brains, these different centers of our endorphins and serotonin that help us to say, wow, I feel seen, I feel heard, I love it here, they so get me, I really want to be here. And so here's what they did. Last year, General Mills went back to 10,000 employees and they said, hey, the effects of the pandemic are still continuing and you're telling us you're burnt out and we hear you. That's why we created the Gift of Choice program, and we're rolling it out today. When you opt into the Gift of Choice program, you will have 3 choices: more PTO, more pay. I mean, we'll write you a check, or a donation to the not-for-profit of your choosing. Within 24 hours, what percentage of their 10,000 employees opted into the Gift of Choice program? Take a guess, put it in the chat. 100%, 80%. Stephanie, you're closest to the pin, 85%. 90%, good guess. 85% opted into the Gift of Choice program. What was the number one choice? Put your guess in the chat. What was the number one choice? Was it more PTO? Was it more pay? Or was it donation to a nonprofit? Heather says nonprofit. Kim says donation. Yep, Nancy, so donation is leading the charge. The number one choice in the Gift of Choice program, Serena, you have it. It was the PTO. Think about this. The employer got to the outcome they wanted that was in alignment with what employees expect by moving from a mandate to meaning. They deployed the 3 most powerful tools to construct a future of work that works, and they work when I work with every organization from a startup to large publicly traded Fortune 50 companies, and it is this: conversation, curiosity, creativity, choice. They asked their employees what mattered. The employees revealed values. The employees offered choices. The employers took the output of those curious conversations, got creative, and said, hey, out of this list, what choices would we be willing to live with? You're all smart leaders. And so you realize that those 3 options were budget neutral, right? It didn't cost them any more to give them a check versus the PTO versus the nonprofit. It was budget neutral. The only thing they activated was the power to choose based on choices that mattered to the employees. Here's how brain science works. We all love to have a choice. And when the choices that are offered to us are choices we view as favorable, it lights up all these activity brain centers that say, this is amazing. I feel great. I love it here. What would change inside of our teams and organizations if we could look in the direction of greater choice? And offering choice begins with getting more curious. Here's the other aspect. When we're looking at solving for things like values and trust and what matters, there's one more critically important word that I see show up in essentially every benchmark, and we see it behind words like autonomy. And it's this, right? People are looking at ownership. We all feel greater ownership of what we help to create. And when you look at the magic of that GM story, or you think about what happens in the stress-free experiment, the reality is ownership says, if I get to contribute some choices, I'm asked for some ideas and I put them forward, whether that's the kind of training I need to be a more effective leader, having performance reviews in the distributed world of work, or whether that's how to solve for the topics that are showing up on the employee pulse survey, or whether that's where and when I work. What happens is we all feel greater ownership of the outcome and we start to buy into the change that's coming when we are invited to contribute to the solutions that will ultimately show up. Now, as employers and leaders, we can't be Santa granting wishes, of course, but the reality is, as leaders, we often own activities and tasks, and creating these mandates that is an opportunity to engage our employees and give them a greater sense of ownership in the outcomes that we are producing. Greater ownership is one of the most effective tools for change management, because what happens is people start to buy into the change a little bit at a time because they are an active participant in creating the choices and understanding the meaning behind them. One other thing I will share with you, and then we will talk about or create space for an opportunity to talk about your questions and what's top of mind for you, is this. And I think about, how do we create upside, right? How do we look in the direction of curiosity, creativity, conversations, and choice that change the game? One other benchmark I want to share with you around these drivers of return to office is that we have seen an increase in the number of employees who are reporting that there is no benefit whatsoever to being in the office at all. In the end of 2022, when we repeated our survey with thousands of participants, in Q4 of 2022, employees are 3 times more likely to say there are no benefits to coming to the office. And here's the stand up. It ties back to what we were talking about. They see no value in coming to the office as a place for connection. Think about that. That's a significant inflection. And I think about, and I'll share this from the chief HR officer of Accenture North America. She's fantastic. I was fortunate to have her as a guest on my podcast. She said, we started thinking, even for an organization as large as Accenture, with as many needs as we have there, and how do we, an organization of that size, meet needs and step into this new world of work in a thoughtful way? How do we get away from, we have the executive retreat and we come out with this series of mandates about how, where, and when we're all going to work now. And we come back together and issue these to employees. And she said, we changed our mindset to asking one fundamentally important question: what would it take to earn a commute? Whether that commute is a customer coming to an event, whether that's an employee coming to the office, whether that's the customer coming into a conference room, how can we create so much value that we would be willing to commit to come together? And she said the other part that's been so powerful inside of their organization and what they've discovered is the mindset of that. Right? If we think about earning a commute, whether that commute is to a restaurant dinner with your customer, or into an office conference room to collaborate on the next big feature or new release, she said the mentality of earning a commute says, what is the value of this meeting? What is the value of this conversation? What's the ROI going to be? How are we going to make it worthwhile? And she said, what we discovered more often than not is what earns a commute is thoughtful collaboration and the opportunity for people to contribute. Nobody at this point wants to feel like they battled their commute to sit in a meaningless meeting where they never talk, nothing gets decided, and none of their ideas are seen, heard, or actioned. And I thought, isn't that powerful to see how curiosity, conversation, creativity, and choice can show up as a single question inside of an organization outside of Accenture and demonstrate such ROI that they pose it every time they're thinking about how they even orchestrate a single customer conversation. So thinking about the benchmarks that we talked about, most important to employees is flexibility over when they work relative to where they work. So give me schedule flexibility versus, physical space flexibility. Next, we talked about the stress-free experiment, the power of returning to your values And understanding the values of others you work with, asking that question, why does this matter to you so much? Even a single 10-minute session of writing about your values results in statistically measurable improvements in performance, health, well being, resilience, ability to access new ideas over a 3-year horizon. We talked about the importance of trust. How do I know you're working? How do I know how hard you're working? Closing the trust gap. Looking in the direction of moving from mandates to meaning. Then using our four most powerful tools to create an effective future of work that works for employers as well as employees. Conversation, curiosity, creativity, choice. Asking the question, what else could this be? What might we be missing? And then the question from our friends at Accenture North America, what would it take to earn your commute? Or we could say, what would it take to earn your commitment? With that, I would love to open it up to some of your questions and make sure we have a chance to answer what's top of mind for you.